We are definitely going to have a hair off here at some point. I think, Caleb,
100%.
Between everybody to see what's happened. Like, there's a lot of hairspray holding this up right now. That's the only reason it's
I bought my first bottle of hairspray in well over a decade. I bought it a couple days ago. And you should have seen my bedhead this morning. I'm not kidding. It was this high. It was just.
Was it LA Looks?
Oh, it was beyond that. It was like reckless abandon. Like, I don't care about my life anymore kind of thing.
Get some frosted tips. This is the new Caleb. This is what quarantine Caleb is like. Hello, everyone. This is Trends with Benefits. This is our weekly roundtable tech podcast here at Digital Trends. Thank you for finding us, broadcasting live in addition to being a podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. We're on a bunch of different platforms. So whatever platform you are on, hit that subscribe button, because each week we have a different topic and we can take your comments as we go throughout the show. And today we're talking about something that we're all dealing with, data caps, and just exactly what that is. How many times have you gone to pay your internet bill and wondered, why am I paying this much? And why, if I pay more, do I get it faster? What do they have to do that? The answer is nothing. So that's what we're going to talk about, at least in part, for this show. But to do so, let's introduce our roundtable cast of characters. I'm Greg Nibbler, and to my virtual right, it is
Adrian Warner, aka Hot Nozzle.
Hot Nozzle.
Oops, I messed up that time. That was totally on me. I will dub that in post, and it'll be perfect.
Good.
Good. Very good.
We got Adrian Hot Nozzle Warner, and then on the end.
Hi, I'm Caleb Dennison, a.k.a. The Whiskey Mist, a.k.a. Chicken Bone, a.k.a. Speedy Gonzalez.
Oh boy.
Damn.
This is what quarantine has done to Caleb. I love it. So you've got the shades, you've got the perfect part, just to make sure that everybody's aware of what we were talking about before we started this show. It's looking fantastic. We can all learn a lesson from Caleb with his hair care.
Oh, a lesson of what not to do, maybe.
Everybody needs a haircut. Everybody needs a haircut. You are not the only one. All right, so we've got Caleb on the end, and then on the other end we have.
I am Drew Prindle, aka Professor Prindle. I do the history segments usually.
That sounds ominous. Usually, okay. So
usually.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. The thing is getting into this and talking about data caps and just what that means. And there's a great op-ed that Caleb has up. That's kind of about this, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit. But since we do have to get a little bit of the history to really understand and flesh out what we're talking about, that is what Professor Prindle is going to bring to the table. So Drew, can you give us walk us back through just a little bit of the history of this? And I love this graphic every time; it still makes me happy.
So good.
Yeah. So going back, just to give an idea and the context of what we're talking about. Can you?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's helpful to kind of just clarify what a data cap is and exactly what we're talking about. So it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's just a limit on the amount of data that you can use. It's like a rule that's imposed by your internet service provider or your phone provider or whatever. The phrase data cap is sometimes used interchangeably with the phrase bandwidth cap, which is actually kind of a misnomer, since it's not the bandwidth that's being capped, like the bits per second that you're using. It's actually how much of that information you can use. So 10 gigs or more, a terabyte or whatever.
Gotcha.
So kind of what brought this whole episode about was right now, in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, a bunch of ISPs have suspended their data caps as sort of a good gesture. They're since everybody's working from home right now and using more data to do video calls and play online games and basically everything, they just kind of wanted to say don't worry about overages, everybody. You can use as much as you want during these trying times. But while that's definitely a good thing, it also kind of exposed the fact that maybe these weren't really necessary because everything's going along fine. And It kind of started to make us wonder, how did they justify these? Where did they come from? How did we get duped into getting these there in the first place, right? So I guess that's the question is how did these data caps get started? And the answer is, they did make sense initially. Back when networks were still being built and the internet was still kind of taking form. In order to maintain a high quality of service for all the users that were on the network, and also in order to recoup some of the costs of building those networks, they started imposing caps. So you'd have to pay a little bit extra, basically pay for how much you're using. And it's easy to forget that because I mean, now the internet is everywhere and we forget that there's actual like physical infrastructure that had to be built to get all of this in place. And that costs money to do. I actually came across a pretty interesting statistic from like the early internet. There was this company called Sonic.net, and they were an ISP that was around in like the early 2000s. And when they were coming up in 2008, at that time, the infrastructure cost, so the cost that they needed to do to like lay cables and just set everything up, was about 20% of the revenue that they brought in. So that's like a massive business cost for them. So they needed a way to recoup that, which like data caps helped with, right? But 8 years later in 2016, those costs had fallen to about 1.5% of their revenue. And they're even lower now for most ISPs because the declining cost of equipment. So it started off as a way to, offset the cost of building a network. But now that we have the networks built, it's like, why do we still have them? So yeah, that's kind of where they came from. I'm sure, Caleb, you can speak to this a little bit more. You kind of know like more of the telecommunications, like the phone provider side of things, because they had a very similar setup. And we've kind of been going through similar things with mobile data and mobile service in general, because they had to build those wireless networks, which initially couldn't handle a ton of traffic and we had to wait for them to build up. But it's pretty much the same story.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to go back to the whole idea of any kind of metered service, right?
Yeah.
Because later in the show, we'll start drawing some distinctions around, consuming stuff, right? So you're used to paying for the amount of electricity that you consume, right? You're used to paying for the amount of water that you consume. And that's because those are resources that you're actually using up. They have to be gathered from somewhere or produced somewhere in the case of electricity and routed to your home, and then you use it, and then it's, in the case of the electricity, it's gone. With water, it gets recirculated back into the system, but they actually have to harvest something in order to give it to you, right? Just keep that in mind. So we get in this we get early on into this notion that the more we use, the more we have to pay for it. And let's take a sidestep over to just telecommunications in general. When we first started getting on the internet, and anybody who's seen the movie War Games knows this, it was over phone lines. Like the earliest modems, you actually took your phone receiver, put it in this thing, and it used the audio to transfer bits of data, zeros and ones, right? We progressed past that, obviously, and started getting modems that we could just plug our phone cord into. But again, we're using a phone line, an existing phone infrastructure, in order to actually get online. And it was really slow. And it took a long time to get from like archaically slow to reasonably fast, right? We ended up with 56K modems, which at the time seemed like a really big improvement, but we weren't. Yeah. It's not like we were streaming video or even audio back then, and graphics on web pages were, very few and far between, and you would actually have to watch it resolve the picture line by line in a lot of cases. Well, then we started moving off of the traditional modem paradigm and into DSL, which we even still have to this day, which still used phone lines, but it created like dual band on the phone line. And that sped things up a little bit more. But the point here is that the phone lines were always open. Like, unless you were dialing a long distance number, which actually required a lot of extra switching and a lot of extra infrastructure to pull off, your phone call to the local BBS or even AOL was through an 800 number. So it didn't cost you anything. And it didn't matter what you did online. You just couldn't use your phone. You were using the internet instead. But when we switched over to DSL, and then internet moved over to cable, like the cable that was delivering TV into our homes, things started to kind of morph. And, ultimately what ended up happening was the amount of bandwidth we were using, like we were clogging the pipes with streaming video and music. And so it was sort of initially a deterrent measure to just running rampant with your use of these pipes. To say, hey, if you do too much, we're going to have to charge you a little extra because you're actually worsening the experience for other people. That was the initial reason that, they started imposing data caps. And that worked on cell phones too. We had data caps. We had limited amount of data, limited talk time, limited text, because as Drew just pointed out, they were still building the network out and there was only so much room for everybody. And then it all winds up in 2016. I think this was the real linchpin moment. In 2016, Comcast put a 1 terabyte data cap on some of its customers, not all of them. And eventually that just kind of spread out everywhere, so that, you know, if you're a Comcast internet customer, for example, then you have a 1 terabyte data cap. And then it's just started getting adopted by a lot of different ISPs. But the thing is, we still have these while your cell phone is unlimited everything. In fact, it's really hard to find a plan that doesn't have unlimited talk, text, and data. And if they can do it over the airwaves, why can't they do it over our internet connection via cable?
And that's really what this is all about, right? Like, why can't they do that? What is the actual reason behind it? If the infrastructure is built out, you know, good enough to handle all of this, we're not going to have, even with everybody working from home now, you know, that whole thing going on, it still seems like we haven't really had a hiccup in it as far as capacity. So why are we still having these things?
Well, meanwhile, I mean, as you said that, somebody's internet connection just faltered and we froze up on the screen or whatever, you know. Okay. I'm sure that there are people that are having exactly. There are people that are, you know, will have some problems. But if you look at the whole, like, we are consuming more, I correct myself. We are not consuming more data. We are exchanging more data now than we ever have in the past. And there some work had to be done to make that possible, but it was a relatively quick switch. I mean, you know, they anticipated the demand, they lifted the data caps. There were a few measures. I think, you know, Netflix got slapped down to standard definition in a few places to try and, you know.
Oh, the horror.
I know. Life is over.
Oh God.
But, you know, by and large, we've gotten by pretty well. I think most people across the US, at least, have had a pretty good overall internet experience if they had broadband to begin with. You know, unfortunately, a wide swath of the nation is stuck with satellite based internet, which in its present iteration is very slow and sometimes unreliable, and they're the worst. Like, you go over your allotted amount of data and they just charge you through the nose. And I think at one point they even had like happy hour for free unbridled internet, which was like from 12 midnight to 5 a.m. I know that's people
horrific.
Yeah, I know people.
Like, my parents, they live out in the middle of nowhere in the country, and that's the only option they have for internet. There's no other option other than satellite. It sucks. It's so bad going out there.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, though, right? Is because that's their only option. So there's no reason for those providers to have competitive pricing at all. It's like, hey, we're the only game in town. We're going to charge you, you know, everything that you've got in order for internet service. And also, but they're also probably, you know, offsetting the cost of putting literal satellites in orbit to deliver internet. And oddly enough, that was probably cheaper than building, you know, miles of cable to go to these rural BFE towns, which is why those places still only have access to satellite internet versus like terrestrial traditional internet.
Terrestrial.
But I mean,
that's the best term
stuck
ever.
With it, terrestrial internet.
It's not space internet, man.
But soon enough, though, we'll have space internet. Right. Okay, so going from there, though, before we get into space internet and everything else, Caleb, like, what else can be done about this? Like, now that we have a better understanding of exactly what's going on, like, what are the states of the companies? Like, what are they saying about this? What are their, like, what's their reply?
They're amazingly quiet. And I mean, I don't know. I put in the piece. I don't think you can put this genie back in the bottle. Like, I don't think they can reinstate data caps now that they have proven that
they've shown their cards.
I mean, you know, what happens exactly? Think about this. What happens exactly when you go over your data cap and they grab 50 extra bucks to give you another, you know, 50 gigabytes of data or whatever it is? Like, how is that extra chunk of money helping to provide for the data transmission over the lines? It's not. you're not actually consuming anything. You're just accessing pipes and shooting stuff, up and down them. It's clearly a cash grab, and it has been for a while now. I mean, imagine if cell phone providers did a 180 and said, yeah, 5G is great and everything, but yeah, we're gonna have to charge you a little extra if you want to have more than a terabyte of this blazing fast speed. There's no way they could sell that past anybody. People would just be like, screw 5G, then I'll stick with 4G and have it for free.
Right.
With your ISP, like, this is just a pure fabrication. It's a false ceiling. It doesn't represent anything. It's not like all of a sudden stuff gets more expensive. The whole idea in the first place, I think, going back to the beginning of this, was a deterrent for people kind of abusing the system and just doing massive amounts of torrenting. Back in the day it was Napster. Now it's, torrents, and just shooting, ridiculous amounts of data all over the place and clogging up the pipes. Well, the pipes aren't getting clogged anymore. We've managed to sustain 4K streaming in increasing amounts for the last 3 years. And yeah, buffering was a problem, but now that they've made a few adjustments and kind of opened up the network, it's very clear that they have the infrastructure in place to allow stuff. And more markets are getting gigabit internet, which brings up another issue I've got a big problem with: speed tiers. Like, right now, I could have 50 megabits per second or 150 or 300. I think it caps out around there. That's about as fast as the network will go. But you can't tell me that there's actually $30 worth of difference between 50 megabits per second and 300 megabits per second. What happens when I give you that $30? What does it help pay for a tech's lunch that day if he has to go out and hook up a wire somewhere? No, it doesn't do anything at all.
Well,
it's just an extra little cash grab. You know what I mean?
And that's actually a question that I have that probably a lot of people do have. When you start adding up and putting the speeds on there, because this is what frustrates me so much, is having to pay more for those speeds, which I've had to do multiple times since working from home and broadcasting from here. I've had to actually switch companies to get faster service. But I switched companies and then I paid basically the same amount. So I see all those different speed tiers. Does that actually clog anything up? Does that make any difference at all? Going from, say, if you have a modem that can handle 50 or whatever they're sending to you, and you go up to 300, it can handle that. Does that change anything infrastructure wise?
I think then this is the only time I will play devil's advocate today, and then I'll just shut up. But like, I think that if you were to just unleash it, right, and say, you know what, we're going to give everybody the max, speed tier. If people went crazy, then yes, they could probably clog up the pipes. But I don't think people are going to be necessarily going, oh, wow, I have a higher speed, I'm going to start streaming more Netflix than I was before, and it'll be more stable. So since it's more stable, I'm going to do more of it. No, I think we're already watching about as much TV and playing about as much video games as we possibly could. And I think that unleashing the higher speed so that when you do need it, so that maybe your show buffers a little bit faster, right? I think that would just be an improvement to the user experience. I don't think that there's something that people en masse would do to actually clog up the pipes. I think it's more of a cash grab. Back in the day, I imagine that they were scared if they unleashed, high speed to everyone all at once, that their behavior may shift and that it would actually degrade the experience for people. But it's proven right now that it's not even really necessary. And honestly, like, I don't know how often I need more than 50 megabits per second. If I wanted to get that movie download a little bit faster, sure, but when you're streaming Netflix and Hulu and Spotify and stuff like that, it doesn't exceed that amount, not even close. You know what I mean? So I think, again, it's just a cash grab. They want to lure you in with the notion that you could get faster internet, but what the net result to you would not be that different. It would be occasionally a benefit to you, but it's not like you're going to just choke the pipes.
So what you're saying is that we need to organize a rally and march against Comcast then, right? Like, we need to start making we need to revolt against ISPs.
Yeah, I do think that we should be making a lot of noise about it.
Yeah.
If we want to advocate for the consumer, then yeah, we do talk about saying no, we're not going to put up with this anymore, and teach people how to get on the horn with their internet service provider, leverage those customer retention programs they have in place, get escalated to the supervisor, and leverage when you can switch to another service, leverage that possibility as a way for you to get what I think you justly deserve.
But see,
All
that
right,
will work
Karens
like
of the world,
individually.
mobilize.
Yeah, mobilize everybody. I mean, if everybody did it at once, yeah. But I mean, I can tell you with my bill with Xfinity, and I've been with them for a long time because they were the only ones that I could get. Yeah, I would call and complain after I noticed on my bill that it had gone up by an exorbitant amount, and it's not like they're going to refund me that. And then they'll put me on another plan that'll last 6 months or a year, and then they'll do the same thing. So it doesn't really, I think, change them unless everybody did it. Like each individual can call, and if you complain enough, they'll throw in like free HBO or something. I've done that. I've paid for HBO in years, but like that doesn't really make up for the difference in cost of what I'm paying overall.
And-
That's just they make so much money. That's just a freebie they can throw in. So
And
yeah,
isn't this like uniquely an American problem too? Like other countries have multiple ISPs where there's a lot of competition, and we really here only have, depending on what your regional market is, like 2 to 3 in each area. And like Greg said, if you're out in the country, bupkis.
It's true. Like Europeans are laughing at our little problem here.
yeah. So how is it in Europe? Like, what all do they have? What have they done that we could emulate here?
You're looking at me for details I don't have, but
Caleb, like, have you taken a look at that? Like, how are they with data caps? How are they with everything else? With
They don't
speed
have
tiers?
them. Like most of Europe doesn't have that kind of thing. They also came up with GDPR.
Yeah.
right.
They're ahead of us. They're ahead of us in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of social justice there, I think, going on that just isn't happening here. We definitely love our capitalism a whole big bunch, and I will throw this thought out there. Cable companies are losing cable subscribers, like the TV service portion of things, like crazy. I mean, it's a genuinely big number, and it just keeps going up and up and up over time. They're definitely feeling it now. And we're about to get a whole lot more free broadcast TV over the air too, which is a little bit of a threat to them, because we'll have a lot more channels that we can access free with an antenna, which is great for just about everybody. There's usually a broadcast tower fairly close to you, especially if you hoist one up on your roof or whatever, right? So I think that they need to offset if people are watching more Netflix or even just using Sling TV or some other internet-based TV delivery system that Spectrum or Comcast or whoever doesn't actually own and profit from, then they've got to get their money somewhere. And it seems like they've been clinging on to just tacking stuff on to your internet bill because you're using it for more and more than you used to, and ditching your cable subscription. We started talking about cord cutting like 8 or 9 years ago, and it's still a thing, and it's continuing to hurt them.
Well, looking at it this way, I mean, with this being an issue like right now for the next few years, this is definitely an issue as the infrastructure gets built out on 5G. Isn't 5G going to replace a lot of this to where essentially they'd either have to remove some data caps or everybody's going to switch over to something like that? Do you think we're going to get to that point where everything goes to 5G?
I think it's going to take a while to get there, where it's widely deployed. But yeah, I mean, 5G for television is exactly that. It's just 5G for internet-based television delivery. So you do see big corporations like Time Warner, Comcast, through NBC Universal. They're creating new streaming services so that you can get your stuff through Peacock, through HBO Max. You know what I mean? That it took them a long time to figure out that people were like kind of done with the whole cable experience and liked using the internet for stuff instead. So it's taken them a while, obviously, but they are there. They're there to grab your money somewhere else. But think about it. That HBO Max subscription is like $15. Peacock has like a ridiculous number of tiers. Some of it's free and some of it's stupid expensive if you don't want ads, but that's still not as much as what they're charging, what they used to charge you for cable. And it just shakes up the whole thing because like something like the Hallmark Channel is practically free for them to provide. Whereas something like ESPN, less so now since there's no sports going on, but ESPN was always notoriously the most expensive channel to provide. So some of it is real cost for them. Others, it's just a cash grab where they want to make as big a margin as they possibly can.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, like with this, I think going back to what you talked about with trying to fix all this, it's going to take like mobilization of a ton of people like making that difference. I think that's the only way. Now the other thing too, looking at it and just throwing out some other options, you know, we talked about the satellite internet with things like Starlink, you know, and what they're doing when that does happen. And they did say that maybe later this year there'll be enough satellites up that they could launch a beta service in North America, and I think Germany is what they were targeting. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be just like most of that stuff. It's going to be longer than that. But when that comes around, that could be a fully legitimate competitor to that. With enough satellites up there, I don't think you're going to have a limit on how much data you can send. And I think that's another way that, you know, this could go to battle with that and go up against some of, you know, the Comcasts of the world, for lack of a bigger company.
For sure. I mean, 5G is so robust, right? When it's around, it's going to let us like watch as much as we want in the highest quality available. And if Starlink works out, you know, again, more of the same, just a different like delivery system. So yeah, I think cable companies are in trouble, you know, and at least in the existing iteration, they've got to pivot, right? I'm curious, actually, who among us is paying for TV through their cable company, or are you just internet only plans?
Internet only.
I haven't paid for like real cable since college, like one of those college packs. So
the only reason I kept it on for a while was because I wanted to watch the Blazers, and you had to watch it through that. But now I cut it even because of that, probably 2 years ago at least. So yeah, I haven't had it for a long time.
Here's another cool question. Who here watches like live TV at all? Like, do you tune into AMC when your favorite show is airing, or do you just stream it when it's available?
Stream, unless it's like like breaking news or something like that. Maybe I'll want to see something, but no, for the most part, or sports. That's the other thing. Sports, I'll watch live, but
you got to watch sports live.
Yeah. It's pointless to watch it afterward, really, for the most part. But that's the only thing, and there's none of that right now, so I don't really have anything that I'm watching live.
Yeah, Adrian, what are you?
Yeah,
what are you?
I can't think of anything that I've watched live in a long time besides like, I don't know, political debates, and usually get those over the radio, which is even more old school.
I love the idea of Adrian sitting in her armchair with her precious Japanese rice and eating tiny little bites while discerning the finer points of the most recent Democratic debate.
With like a 8-foot wide radio that's like a centerpiece in the room.
She's got 400 vinyl records, but she's never listened to any of them.
It's all crackling through.
Why are we
breaking rules? The debates are on today. All right.
I got my megaphone or my gramophone that I've cranked up.
That's
how we do it in the Warner household.
All right. Well, either way, this is, I mean, I just realized too what time it is. Like, there's a big debate, and I've seen a lot of the comments that have come through. There's people who are for and against what we're talking about and debating, but that's the thing. There's a lot to decide on with this, and regardless, right now is the time to have these debates. And I want to suggest everybody to watch Caleb's. Sorry, I was watching the delay of Adrian cranking that. I want everybody to go and watch or read Caleb's article at digitaltrends.com. Read that thing because it's a lot of good information. We've got a lot of information at digitaltrends.com that you can follow up on and learn about this stuff. And, let us know what you think. Send us an email, podcast@digitaltrends.com. Hit subscribe to our podcast. That'd be awesome too. Wherever you get those, where you get the audio versions. And I think that's about it for right now. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another episode.